Poverty in the UK today looks different. It's quieter, more invisible. It has a job, pays rent, wears clean clothes, and might even own a smartphone. Yet it's barely hanging on.
The UK is in the grip of a cost of living crisis.
We've got a massive hike in energy bills. I had £1.50 in my hand.
Making documentaries around the world, I've witnessed poverty in many countries. But one film I thought I'd never make is a film about poverty on my own doorstep.
I want to kick off this episode by painting a picture, not the kind that you see on a charity poster or a government leaflet. Poverty isn't always what people think it is. Going back, what we're actually talking about, the past, which is sometimes hard for me, and I get a little bit sidetracked why I think these episodes are going to be a bit longer, because it's me and I'm working with my brain here, folks. Folks felt like I had to say that there, or else the sentence wasn't finished. Anyway, can you see how my brain's been working recently? Or this is kind of just it all the time. Let's stop procrastinating. Wow. It seems like these episodes might not just be long, but a little bit chaotic, and we're just going to roll with it. I'm doing a lot of arm movements today. I'm clearly feeling very energetic. Oh, I need to tone it down a bit, Becca, or maybe I just roll with it. I don't know. Let's see, we're 9 minutes in and this could be something. The period is also due. You can probably notice all of the spots I've got breaking out across my face. Time of the month, love being a woman. Is this going to be the theme of the episode? Poverty and chaos? Maybe this should just be cut out and had as the intro instead of me painting a picture, because this is paint a picture of what it's like to be Becca and what the Cripple Chronicles podcast is all about. But I need to get back to my notes instead of just ad-libbing. Who gave me a microphone? Who let me have this equipment? Sorry. Hi friends, welcome back to another episode of the Cripple Chronicles podcast. If you are just tuning in and watching today, hi, I am Becca. I like to chat about disability, mental health, advocacy, and whatever comes into my brain. This episode is a bit of background that growing up can impact us well into adulthood. Sometimes in loud and dramatic ways, but most of the time it really is that voice that is inside of your head that no one else can hear. And sometimes you don't even know where it came from because you have been so used to it. This episode and the next is something that I have been thinking about for the past few months. Feelings that I have been processing, and part of the reason on top of my mobility why I just needed some time to step back from editing and posting because I didn't have the energy to spare. You'll notice that I didn't say I took a step back from the podcast because I still have been doing things in the background, but I am really excited with what I have put together. So if this sounds like something that you would like to explore with me, grab a snack, get comfortable, and remember to subscribe, leave a like, rate on podcasting platforms, and share the podcast with your pals. And if you've got any questions or thoughts, or just want to share your own story or get in contact, you can send me an email to cripplecchroniclespod@gmail.com. Let's get into it. Growing up in the late 90s and early 2000s of Scotland, there was this quiet rule that we all seemed to follow. You just got on with it. It didn't matter if things were rough. In fact, the rougher they were, the more you were just expected to power through without making a fuss. Talking openly about money was very rare, and if it came up at all, it was usually through humour, people making jokes about being skint like it was a badge of honour. There was a strange sort of pride in just making do and surviving when you had very little, and managing to keep it all together when it was very clearly falling apart. Especially in the west of Scotland, there is this mindset, part culture, part survival instinct, that teaches you to downplay your achievements and just keep your head down. In some families, harshness was mistaken for love. Encouragement came in the form of, don't get ahead of yourself, don't think you're better than anyone else. You learn not to expect praise and definitely not to seek it. That kind of emotional environment can make it even harder to talk about money or hardship, and it teaches you early on that silence is safer than shame. Where I grew up, a lot of factories had shut. The big employers, the ones your parents or grandparents worked in, were long gone. For example, there was a Polaroid factory near me, and I had quite a few elderly neighbours that used to work in the Polaroid factory. Jobs just weren't as stable anymore. I also lived near what in, I think, World War II was a bomb factory, which was now turned shopping centre, which is still going now. And I'm not entirely sure how, because it's not a busy one. It is mostly empty shops, a works, a cafe, maybe a mobile repair shop or a jewellery shop. I feel like that kind of summed up a lot of it. Things just trying to keep going even when there was no support around them. At school, I can always remember that I was just double checking my dinner card balance at break, but really I was making sure that I wasn't going to be embarrassed at lunch because the money hadn't went in, that we were getting help off of the government. There was this tension, like poverty was a game of hide and seek, and I was always trying not to be found out. I didn't have the branded jumpers, I wore trainers, I'd never really been one for jackets. Like hoodies from Primark did the job, and there would be times where it'd be in winter and my mum would be saying to me, get a fucking jacket on, and I'd be there with two hoodies saying, no, I'm fine, I don't want to wear a jacket. And it's not that I went completely without, but I always felt like I was kind of window shopping while other people could actually go out and follow the trends. My clothes weren't really about fashion, it was about not standing out too much, about not giving people a reason to question you or single you out. But I mean, somebody with my style now would have stuck out like a sore thumb. Like in school, I don't know if you'll remember kind of back in the day, Primark plimsolls, they came in all different colours, and me trying to kind of be a bit more stylish when, like, I spoke about me and Samantha dyeing her hair. I would go out wearing one, like, green shoe, one yellow shoe. And part of that, I wasn't blending in, but also I was trying to figure out who I was. But a lot of the time I opted for blacks and greys and trying to blend into the background. People that kind of knew me in uni would have said that I was just so quiet and timid and could never imagined the Becca back then being how she is now. But that is something that I take a lot of pride in now. However, going back, what we're actually talking about, the past, which is sometimes hard for me, and I get a little bit sidetracked why I think these episodes are going to be a bit longer, because it's me and I'm working with my brain here, folks. Folks felt like I had to say that there or else the sentence wasn't finished. Anyway, can you see how my brain's been working recently? Or this is kind of just it all the time. Let's stop procrastinating. Wow. Wow. It seems like these episodes might not just be long, but a little bit chaotic, and we're just going to roll with it.
Chaos is a wonderful, wonderful thing.
I'm doing a lot of arm movements today. I'm clearly feeling very energetic. Oh, I need to tone it down a bit, Becca, or maybe I just roll with it. I don't know. Let's see, we're 9 minutes in and this could be something. The period is also due. You can probably notice all of the spots I've got breaking out across my face. Time of the month, love being a woman. Is this going to be the theme of the episode? Poverty and chaos? Maybe this should just be cut out and had as the intro instead of me painting a picture, because this is paint a picture of what it's like to be Becca and what the Cripple Chronicles podcast is all about. But I need to get back to my notes instead of just ad-libbing. Me being as chaotic as my brain feels and actually doing it outward and knowing that I'm going to edit this podcast and probably leave a lot of these brain farts in. People who know me, I am on my meds. It's just a bit of a crazy day. Okay, we're just going with it. We're rolling with it. Keep rolling, rolling, rolling. That wasn't the song that was in my mind. It was Proud Mary. But let's go into talking about school and home and poverty and all of those lovely things. I am going to bark. Perfect way to end that, 3-minute ramble. So I feel like I need to have a little bit of a recap after that. I was somebody that tried to, as much as I was figuring out who I was, dyeing my hair, wearing different coloured shoes, I got bullied for it. So I opted for blacks and greys and blending into the background and trying just not to make too many waves. And it wasn't just at school, at home, things looked fine from the outside. A terraced house on a main road, joined to others that looked similar. But inside, extension cords trailed between rooms. The electric meter had been modified. I won't say how, I don't even remember how, but it was like living in a permanent state of hoping that nobody knocked the door to check a meter reading or to see that it was working properly. The kitchen was something that my mum went on about for years, that you'd get this big double American fridge and it would be all these counters and this, that and the next thing, but it never got finished. The walls were bare in some places, half papered, others just plastered. Payday didn't really feel like a celebration. It was just a bit of a reset. Like, the money came in, it got swallowed by bills, debt, weekly or monthly shops, usually at Costco, or one of the shops used to be called Macro, where it would be 20 pork chops and those would go in the freezer, and it would probably do us more than a month. It always kind of felt like it was trying to get away from square one. I didn't really realise how different my life was to other kids probably until primary 6. That's when kind of bigger school trips started happening, ski trips, museums, camps. Every trip came with a form and a price tag, and at times I didn't bother asking. A guides camp on the weekend where I knew I would have been at my dad's and I didn't want to have to ask him for the money. I just got used to kind of staying behind, pretending that I didn't really fancy it. Don't get me wrong, sometimes we scraped together enough for things, but it was never a given. Getting to go to Alton Towers at the end of a school year with my pals, or one of the things that I really remember from high school was getting to go to Disneyland Paris, but this wasn't your end of the year trip where you're just going away and you're having a good time with your classmates. This was because I worked hard in maths and I was in the top set and I met the criteria to qualify for going on this trip. And when we were going around Disneyland Paris, we had maths workbooks that we had to fill out. But it was one of those where it was an experience outside of school. It was some time away from home. But even whilst I was there, I remember my mobile not working because I didn't realise that I had to get a data roaming kind of package. So I was only able to call my parents once a day or once every 2 days when I was kind of near a phone box. And it was actually a bit of a relief not feeling like I had to check in. But at the same time, being away, I had to be very conscious of being around the parks, what I was spending my money on. I wanted to get souvenirs and things, but Disneyland's expensive. So it was all of this that came into it, where I could see my peers just picking up things and not really worrying that much about the money because they had it. And I think that's the point where you kind of realise differences, but it was also, it's not as if I was the only one going through this. There was a lot of people that were on the same boat as me and probably going through the same things and trying to hide it in similar ways, where I kind of felt like I was the only one. I'd kind of mentioned about being away, not realising about data roaming. Phones became a big deal in high school. I remember, I think it was like primary 7, it was like a touch screen. I don't know if it was a Samsung. Oh no, it was an LG Cookie. I don't know if anybody remembers LG Cookies, but it was like a little touchscreen phone. It had the stylus, you could draw on it. I was the first person to get an LG Cookie, and I honestly felt like the coolest person. But trends move on really quickly, and it soon became about, I think it was like a Samsung that like you could take the back off of it and change it colours, again, touchscreen. So there was that, and then there was the Blackberries, and I remember like Windows phones coming out and them being so cool, and I ended up being able to save up and getting a Windows phone, and I had it in my pocket after like 2 weeks at school and the screen smashed because I like tapped it off the side of a table, and I was so gutted. And it's that kind of thing where when things like this happened, I was even more upset because I understood like the saving and the stress that went into buying these things. And then when accidents happened, or maybe, I don't know, it was always kind of phrased in a way that I was inconsiderate of my belongings and I didn't care about it, and it was the total opposite. So whenever something happened, it would be one of those things where I would be like really scared to tell my dad, mostly because he was the person that had money coming in and might be able to fix it, and I was so worried that he would say that I was careless or something like that. So then I'm trying to think about how do I fix it myself, and then all of this stress builds up until I say, oh well, look, actually this happened. And I feel like that kind of sums it up. It is all that kind of mental gymnastics, and even kind of in school, outside of phones, the other thing I can think of was Hollister and Jack Wills. That was like a big thing. Everybody had a Jack Wills hoodie that said JW and cost like 80 to 100 quid. Hollister jumpers, which were in the same price range. People had like the Hollister sprays that I remember being in like the gym changing room and being like, oh, can you give me a spray? Because I couldn't spend £15 on a bottle of body spray. Like, I remember going into Jack Wills with a few of my friends, and they were looking round and trying on jumpers and stuff like that. Do you know what I bought? A pencil case that was £10, and I'd saved up for like 3 or 4 weeks because every week my mum would give me like an extra £5 for dinner money if I wanted to go outside of the school one day to get like chips and cheese or something like that. So maybe one day I would go out and I'd spend like £2, and then I'd keep that other £3, and then that £3 went towards my pencil case that I bought that was so small. And it was one of those where I just wanted to fit in some kind of way, but I knew that I wasn't even really, I feel like I've never really been interested in brands, but I feel like that's because it's never seemed within reaching distance. And even then, because I've always kind of worked with what I've got, spending that amount of money on like a hoodie that just has a JW on it doesn't seem like a good cost, or like it doesn't seem like a good financial decision to spend the money on that, when I understand that like fast fashion nowadays, Primark, Shein, things like that, the quality is less than say a jumper that was going to be 80 quid, but then at the same time it's affordable. And I don't really know if this is making sense. I've kind of went a bit off topic whilst still talking on topic. I hope this kind of makes sense, or at least I can edit it together to make sense. I think the point I'm trying to make is it wasn't just about stuff, it was about the feeling, the constant calculations. Can we afford that? Can I ask for that? Will I be judged if I wear this again? Will I be judged if I don't buy this thing? There were kids in my year who it just seemed like they had things sorted. They had routines, support, parents that could step in. I remember noticing that some kids had tutors or get picked up from schools in cars that weren't kind of hanging together. Their uniforms were always pristine. They never forgot their gym kits. They always had homework. They weren't smelling like smoke or fried food. And while some people talk about poverty like it is just about food banks or not being able to afford to go on holiday, the reality is deeper. It is knowing how to stretch that £10 over a week. Maybe not now with the cost of living increasing, it's probably more £20 over the week, but some people don't extra have a £20 and it is still £10. It is making meals stretch 3 days instead of 2 or 1. It is knowing that if you break something, you can't replace it, that if you fall behind, there is no one or no safety net to catch you. It's the haven holidays that my mum spent months cutting coupons out of the paper. By high school, I wasn't just aware of poverty, I was beginning to be shaped by it. I had internalised the fear of asking, of needing, of not being enough. There was no cushion, no backup plan, just a very thin tightrope that I felt like I was walking on, in a hope and a prayer that I wouldn't fall. Poverty wasn't just a lack of money, it was a lack of options, of freedom, of peace.
It makes me feel broke. I do not lie about the fact that I grew up broke. When I say I grew up broke, that is my experience, that is how I felt. Feel broke, because I called pasta noodles. Feel broke.
According to the Scottish Government's 2023 Poverty and Income Inequality Report, about 24% of children in Scotland live within relative poverty. That is nearly 1 in 4. And those statistics don't always reflect the emotional cost, the constant stress, the fear, the things that you don't learn because you're too busy surviving. Poverty becomes normal until one day you realise it isn't, and by then it is already seeping into your bones and shaping the person that you're becoming. The hidden dynamics of family poverty. Let's talk about the reality behind closed doors, not the headlines, not the stats, but the real stuff. Because poverty doesn't just live in your bank account, it lives in relationships and power dynamics and how safe or unsafe it feels to be at home. Growing up, money was always tight, but it wasn't just low income. It was chaos, it was instability. You didn't know what the mood would be like, if the bills had been paid or not. There was short bursts of where things felt okay. And then everything would collapse again, and addiction was a huge part of that, and so was emotional neglect. And the economic control that was happening quietly in the background. My mum struggled with alcohol, and at the time, I didn't fully understand it. I just knew that things felt scary sometimes. There was shouting that money was supposed to go to bills or it might not make it there. I didn't understand the bigger picture until I got older. I started to click on by the end of primary school, and by starting high school, I knew all of her tales. But I still at that point didn't understand that she was dealing with trauma, mental illness, abandonment, and trying to do it all without proper support. But here's the part that did really shape me, what was going on in the background. The economic abuse. The money wasn't in her account, it wasn't in her control. And that meant her survival, and by extension mine, depended on somebody else deciding when they wanted to help. And if the person in control cares more about themselves than the people depending on them, that can mean a very turbulent environment. And that power imbalance, it affects everything. The tension in the house, the decisions you make, the way you grow up second guessing whether it's okay to eat what's in the fridge, whether you'll be blamed for if something breaks, whether if asking for help will start a fight. I moved out at 18 a few months before turning 19, and even though I had my own space, that mindset followed me. Scarcity, guilt, survival mode. I moved into a house that was supposed to be temporary. It was mid-renovation. I was told that it would get sorted whilst I lived there. It didn't. I lived bedbound, my leg in a frame, staring exposed brick with my mum's name written on it. They painted the walls the day that I moved out because they were putting it up for sale. It hurt. It reminded me that even though that I'd moved forward, I still felt very disposable. You grow up thinking that you'll escape it, that one day you'll have a quote-unquote normal life, but escaping poverty isn't just about earning more, it's about unlearning all of the ways that it taught you to survive. I've made decisions that weren't always financially smart, but they weren't about luxuries, they were about surviving, putting food on credit, skipping meals to make sure I could cover my bills, delaying repairs or health appointments because I couldn't afford the upfront cost, choosing between heating and feeding myself. Even as an adult, I've struggled to spend money on things that I need. Disability aids, accessibility tools. I tell myself that I'll buy them next month, but then next month comes and there's nothing left. This isn't just economic poverty, it's emotional poverty, chronic stress, hyper-independence. It's never learning how to properly ask for help because help never came when you needed it. According to a 2022 Joseph Rowntree Foundation study, people who grow up in poverty are more likely to face long-term poor mental health, unstable housing, and economic insecurity. And it's not just about money. It's about how poverty shapes your brain, your nervous system, your relationships. It teaches you to be afraid, to expect failure, to be grateful for crumbs. Even when you finally get your own place, a steady job, or some form of stability, the fear doesn't leave you. It is still there, whispering and waiting. Poverty isn't just something that you grow up in, it becomes this heavy weight that you carry. Education felt like my way out, my golden ticket, or so I thought. I was first in my family to graduate university, stepping into a world that felt so completely new and a bit scary. I wasn't going to study psychology like I first dreamed. I had missed the grades, but a lecturer had suggested nursing instead when I was actually at a college interview for psychology. Something more practical and something that had stable jobs. Mental health nursing felt like the right place for me, a chance to make a difference, not just clock in hours. Now, if you think that nursing students get the same support as other university students in the UK, think again. In Scotland, we don't get student loans for nursing, we get a bursary. And back when I started, the bursary was around about £506 a month. That sounds okay at first, but when you break it down, travel, food, bills, and the little things like keeping a cat alive, it doesn't stretch very far. I worked night shifts on top of classes and placements to make ends meet. Sometimes I would finish a 12-hour night shift in a care home and travel to a lecture or on the bus exhausted, but knowing that I had to keep going because failure wasn't an option. I was lucky enough to not have to pay rent. The house belonged to my dad, but I still stashed money away in case he suddenly asked me to start paying rent. That fear hung over me all the time, and part of that is because I'd said to my mum that I would give her £50 a month when I started uni, and she told me that she didn't want the money. And then when I got accepted to uni, she started to tell me that she maybe wanted £200 a month off of me, and £200 a month on top of like an £150 train ticket, that's £350. I've got £150 left to cover bills. I was paying my food and then get to placement and do all of that stuff. It was a lot, and it did hang over me, but eventually I started to feel like my dad wasn't going to ask me to pay rent, and that money dwindled. And like I said, it's kind of the day-to-day struggle that nobody talks about, the small choices that add up, like catching the earliest train out, sometimes before 6 a.m, trekking across Glasgow to placement. Lunch breaks meant making tough calls. Do I get up earlier and make myself lunch? Do I get a proper meal, or do I grab something cheap? And sometimes the nearest option for some placements was a petrol station with a Marks and Spencer's, which was daylight robbery for a student nurse on a budget. Sometimes I had to tap into my emergency credit just to get by. I knew that I would pay it off later, but there was this mental toll that every penny was a calculation. When you're juggling loans, bursaries and bills, let's talk about the bursary a little bit more. Unlike student loans, bursaries don't have to be paid back, which sounds like a win, right? But there's a catch. It's fixed, it doesn't go up with inflation, and it's barely enough to cover the basics. The reality is that many nursing students are forced to work while studying, which adds to the exhaustion and stress. You're constantly split between basically 2 full-time jobs, learning to care for others whilst trying to care for yourself. And because of this, mental health among nursing students can be a very big concern. Studies show that nursing students have higher rates of anxiety and burnout compared to other university courses. The pressure to succeed whilst maintaining finances can be extremely overwhelming. You quickly learn to batch cook meals, frozen chicken from farm foods becomes a staple, batch cooking for the week, freezing meals to grab it out of the freezer and have it just quickly after a long shift. Convenience doesn't always mean expensive. There was no yellow sticker bargains for me. I'm too picky, but I became a pro at stretching every meal, and I even found the joy in the simple things. A colouring book, some chocolate, small treats that felt like a luxury when you're watching every penny. The biggest weight wasn't just money though, it was the fear of what happens after university. The nursing workforce in the UK, especially mental health, has been struggling for years. Staff shortages, burnouts, underfunding, it's not news. It was something where I didn't really have to worry about if I'd find a job in my field or end up stuck working a minimum wage role with a degree in a mountain of debt, something that many graduates face. But there was also this creeping feeling that no matter how hard I worked, I might still be trapped. I wasn't doing this to get rich. Nursing is not a lucrative career in the UK, especially mental health or any kind of form of nursing. You're all paid on the same kind of level. But I hoped for security, for a life where I wasn't just constantly trying to survive. I'd visited New Zealand and I kept thinking about it, how nurses were paid better there, how the landscape was different but reminded me of home. It felt like a dream, a way out. I imagined building a few years' experience here, saving money, and then starting fresh halfway across the world. But even with all of the hope, the juggling, the dreams, there were moments where that weight felt too much. Nights spent wondering if I could keep up, the exhaustion that comes from pushing yourself so hard. The mental toll of watching your friends enjoy a normal student life whilst you're balancing placements, work and a shit ton of worry. It was hard and it still is for many nursing students, but there was something fierce about knowing that I was the first in my family to do this, that I was making a new path, not just for me, but also breaking generational curses. And so after all of the juggling, the hopes, the fears, the late night shifts and the tiny victories, I finished university, degree in hand, a job offer waiting, and a future that I thought for the first time felt possible. Not perfect, not easy, but possible. I thought I was ready. I thought this was the moment where the flowers that I had been planting for years were finally going to be able to bloom. But life had other plans. After all of the juggling, working nights while studying, living off £506 bursary payments, scraping together that rent just in case, finishing placement exhausted, I'd done it. I made it through. I'd passed my driving test after 2 years of stop-start lessons, trying to work around uni, placements, jobs, and whether I could even afford it that month. I had my own second car, a 2010 blue Renault Twingo. It was tiny, needed an adapter to play music, and the maps only worked if I balanced my phone just right, but it was mine, and it changed everything. Suddenly I wasn't stuck navigating 2-hour train journeys to get to work or placement. I wasn't collapsing into bed after getting home at 11 p.m. only to wake up at 5 and do it all again. I could get to Aldi, do a proper food shop, pick up my prescriptions, go visit friends. I was actually feeling like I had some control over my time and my energy, and it felt like maybe life was finally softening. Weekly shops with fresh fruit and meat, even if it was from Aldi, because I could now get there. I wasn't avoiding the dentist anymore, worried that the treatment might cost me more than I could manage, and I even let myself actually properly think about New Zealand. I allowed myself to make plans, not massive dreams, just life things, small luxuries, like planning meals that didn't come from the freezer, day trips, being able to help a friend when they needed it. I wasn't rolling in it, but it was the first time that I felt like maybe I wasn't going to be drowning. But then 2 weeks in, before my first paycheck, my accident happened. And I'm not going to go into every detail of it. There is a playlist of all the podcast episodes where I talk about the accident and the aftermath. That if you want to watch them after, they're there. But what matters for this episode is what changed in that moment, which was everything. 1 second, I was taking my boyfriend to work, planning to go home and vote and then head out for another nursing shift. I was going to the gym on my days off, running on the treadmill, and the next I was in a hospital bed, hooked up to drips, in pain I didn't know that would become chronic, and 2 weeks into my career I became the patient and not the nurse. And I didn't know at that time that I would never make it back to that job. I really thought that I would make a full recovery, though what a full recovery meant to me back then is very different to what it means now. I'd say I have fully recovered from the accident itself. The things I deal with now are in relation to disability. There's a distinction there that is hard to put into words sometimes, but I hope it kind of makes sense to the people that get it. I went from imagining a potential future in New Zealand to wondering how I was going to afford daily life. My income was gone before it ever really started. It wasn't until I moved into my own flat a few years ago that I really understood how strict I had to be with money, how quickly it all added up, and how tight things could get even when it feels like you're doing everything right. At first, after my accident, I was still getting sick pay, even though I had only worked 5 shifts. That really helped, and so did the car insurance payout, which came through quite quickly. I decided to use some of that money to pay off my debts, which was around 6 to 7 grand at the time of my accident. I chipped away at it and I managed to get my debt around to about 2,000, 2,500 by 2022. But when the sick pay ended after 1 month of full pay and 3 months of half pay, things got tougher. I couldn't apply for ESA or Universal Credit straight away, and I was relying on PIP alone, which at the time was about £500 a month. And while I didn't have big bills, I also couldn't go anywhere or do anything because I wasn't really living, I was still bedbound. And what's hard now is that even when the money comes in, it's already gone. I pay everything off immediately just to stay on top of it, but that leaves so little left. Groceries, medical stuff, anything extra, I still split what's left between needs and maybes, and even then it rarely stretches. I've skipped meals, sat under blankets instead of turning the heating on. Before my debt management plan, I was putting Asda orders on Uber Eats to be able to use my PayPal credit to cover it, not buying handbags or luxury stuff, literally just being able to afford groceries. And even when food is something that you can't afford without credit, that's when I knew that I needed help. I have been extremely lucky to have people in my life like Eleanor and Jonathan. Jay lent me money that I'm still paying back in small bits, and Eleanor sent me money so I could get shopping, even though it meant that we were both skint. It's community. It's survival, it's love in action. And when I think about how little support I've had from some people that I guess I expected more from, it stings. And I'm not somebody to name names, but when You tell someone that you have never missed a single payment, even though you have been in debt for nearly a decade, and you get silence back. That stays with you. The mental health impact is massive. I felt trapped in the frame, in appointments that never ended, and hope that didn't seem to go anywhere. When my leg snapped, it felt like it had all been for nothing. And I know now that it wasn't, but in that moment, it was crushing. And add financial pressure to that, it's like being pulled under. And I genuinely think if I hadn't reached out for debt help and to put myself on a debt management plan, I don't know how I would have made it through. Nursing taught me so much about other people, about my mum, about myself. Growing up emotionally neglected had left me a little bit lost. Through mental health nursing, I started to understand my own emotions whilst understanding other people's too. I stopped thinking that I had to save everyone and started realising that healing is a choice, and a very hard one, but it is a choice nonetheless. I lived for years in a house that could not meet my needs physically or emotionally. I washed my hair in the kitchen sink, used a commode, and I convinced myself that I was doing something wrong by applying for council housing. Like, I wasn't disabled enough, like, needing help was a failure, like, asking made me weak. But that mindset, that's what poverty does. It keeps you small and it makes you feel like you're undeserving. Disability changed everything. Some friends vanished and others became chosen family. I now know what relationships are good for me and which ones aren't. I used to be so hyper independent, running myself into the ground just to prove that I could cope. But now I know when I need to ask for help. I'm still learning, but it's mine, my routine, my boundaries, my pace. Poverty taught me how to survive. Disability taught me how to adapt. And now I'm just learning to live. So here I was, disabled, out of work, still recovering, still in pain, living on PIP alone and trying to figure out how the hell the system actually worked. When it came up to being discharged from hospital, I was told that I could apply for PIP straight away because I had been in the hospital for 3 months. There was a woman that I could call, she helped me through the forms, and then my half sick pay from the NHS ended and I had received a letter telling me that I was to apply for ESA. I didn't really know what that meant at the time, employment and support allowance, but then I was told that I had to apply for universal credit instead. And guess what? I hadn't paid enough contributions. You typically need to have paid enough Class 1 or Class 2 national insurance contributions in the last 2 to 3 tax years. Because I had only worked 2 weeks as a nurse, I hadn't met the minimum threshold to claim certain types of ESA or universal credit, and PIP doesn't count towards these contributions the same way the earnings do. That was a harsh reality. I had done everything right. I went to uni, I worked hard, I got qualified, and 2 weeks in, it all went sideways. And that safety net that I thought was there, it was full of holes. I didn't grow up thinking that benefits were shameful. But I did grow up watching someone close to me have to keep their reliance on benefits a secret. It was always this unspoken thing. They were over the 16-hour threshold, technically working too much, but it was hidden, carefully juggled, avoiding certain places in case someone recognised them during a DWP appointment, and the anxiety of that really seeped in. Later, they ended up getting caught, and guess who got the blame? Me. At 16 or 17 for dobbing them in. I hadn't, but the whole experience left a mark. It made me afraid of the system, afraid of doing anything wrong, afraid of getting help at all. So when I was told that I could apply for disability benefits, I hesitated. And now, for a while, I have been 1 point off of qualifying for the enhanced daily living rate of adult disability payment. A decision that healthcare professionals have told me was wrong since 2021, but it took me years to find the energy to put it down on paper. And when the decision came back, it took me additional months on top of that to find the energy to even write an appeal. I didn't want to seem like I was asking for too much. I didn't want to be seen the way that I had taught to view people on benefits. Lazy, suspicious. But do you know what? I was entitled to it and I needed it, not to live in luxury, but to just be able to actually live, to pay for adaptions, to not constantly feel like I'm sinking. People like to throw around the phrases like benefit scrounger or work shy, but what they never see is the stress, the humiliation, the paperwork, the constant reassessments, the emotional cost of providing over and over that you're still disabled, still sick, still in need. And what about the fear? The fear of breaching a condition, of trying to make money but working too many hours, earning too much, doing something wrong and losing everything. That fear does not go away. It clings to you. There have been times where I have just accepted what I was given, even when I knew that I deserved more, because fighting the system took more energy than I had. I've cried after benefit calls, I've had panic attacks before assessments, I've sat in rooms and been told that my needs aren't bad enough whilst trying not to scream, or having people look at me and say, that's really hard, but... It's not just the system though. It's what it does to your relationships, your mental health, your sense of identity. I spent years planning my life around making just enough, but never too much. Around societal rules that I didn't understand, around guilt that never belonged to me. And now I am learning to rebuild, slowly, carefully, knowing when I can ask for help, that I deserve dignity, that my worth is not measured in hours worked or pounds earned. And I've been learning that sometimes surviving is more than enough. So that is it for this episode. It has been a longer one, but do you know what? It wasn't actually as long as I thought it was going to be. Poverty, disability, family trauma, the system, it's a lot. But it is a reality for so many of us. We grow up thinking if we just work hard enough, if we do all of the right things, follow the rules, that we'll be okay. But the truth is, sometimes life knocks you sideways and the rules are never written with us in mind. Next episode, I am going to dive deeper into the emotional side of this, but also the systemic side. What poverty does to your self-worth. How growing up poor, disabled or unsupported shapes the way you see yourself, and why breaking the cycle isn't just about money, it's about healing. I'll be sharing more about recovery, community care and the complicated feelings around asking for help, applying for benefits, feeling worthy, but how complicated that can be when you need to prove your illness or disability to be given money, where a lot of us can still face relative poverty, and yet, with the current news, there are still more cuts coming. Until then, I hope you have enjoyed this episode. If you have resonated with anything that I say, please leave a comment down below, leave a like. If you have anything to get in contact with me, send me an email to cripplecchroniclespod@gmail.com. I'll see you in a few weeks for the next episode. You're not alone. Be gentle with yourself. See you later, friends. Bye!